As I mentioned earlier, NOAA Library is very excited to host Bruce Vogt today. Bruce is the Ecosystem Science Manager at NOAA's Chesapeake Bay office. He is an estuarine ecologist managing projects to improve our understanding of the links between habitat condition, water quality, and living resources to support Chesapeake Bay management objectives. He also leads fishery science and coordination activities of the Chesapeake Bay Program. I'll let him tell you more about his work. So the mic is yours, Bruce.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to the audience today. I'm excited to be here and talking about some of the things that we've got going on in the Chesapeake, and I also hope that some of you see yourselves in this work and offer to contribute along the way, but I'll get to that later. Just wanted to mention, my parents grew up in New York. They moved to the Chesapeake Bay when I was about 8, and I grew up in a small fishing community called Guinea, Virginia. It's on the Mobjack Bay. For those of you who know your bay geography, or if you want to pull it up on the map, look up Mobjack Bay. It's a small fishing community. There's a lot of debate about where the name Guinea came from and where the people originated from. I don't think anyone's found the exact answer. Um, However, growing up there, I saw a lot of changes in the Chesapeake during that time. The fishing community was very vibrant and robust when we first moved there, and it got smaller and smaller over the years. The oysters that used to be on our shoreline that we used to go and harvest with some of the watermen started to disappear. We didn't know exactly why. We worked with the Virginia Institute of Marine Science to do some research on diseases and things. We even tried some aquaculture experiments, um, and I saw the watermen sort of, as I said, dwindle and start to take on new jobs in other parts of the community, and stopped hearing the boats at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. So that's what really got me interested in what's going on in the Chesapeake and interested in marine science and led to the career that I have today. And so I'm so grateful to be at the Chesapeake Bay office where I get to work with communities like the one I grew up in, but with others throughout the Bay and really trying to understand what is happening in the system and using science to best develop solutions to address those challenges, both for the environment and for the people who live here. And I wanted to say before I really get going that in Guinea, where I grew up, the way that I would welcome all of you, if I saw you on the street or in a marsh, more likely, where I grew up, would be, "What you say, Baba?" So that's my attempt at speaking in a Guinea accent. If you want to hear more, give me a call. I'm going to leave it there for now. But again, I'm grateful for being here. Really happy to talk about the work we're doing in the Chesapeake Bay, and hopefully we will be in contact further. So here's the outline for today. We'll talk a little bit about what's about the Chesapeake Bay. For those of you who aren't familiar with the geography, we'll talk about some of the challenges that are going on. We'll also talk about Bay Program history. Bay Program partnership is an effort that's working to restore the Chesapeake Bay. I'll get in more detail. We're also going to talk about the framework that the Chesapeake Bay Program is operating under to implement a number of goals and what we call outcomes to restore and protect the Bay. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how our NOAA Chesapeake Bay office is involved in that partnership and the things we're doing to support the outcomes. And then we'll talk a little bit about where we're going from here, because we're at a transition period with the Chesapeake Bay Program. And we're looking to hear from more parts of NOAA about how we might move forward with Chesapeake Bay Program efforts into the future that go beyond our NOAA Chesapeake Bay office. And I'll wrap up by talking a little bit about a workshop that we're planning for later in the year. The things I hope you walk away from in this presentation are: one, listen for things that are happening here that may align with or connect to work that you're doing within NOAA. And hopefully that's going to prompt some thoughts about, maybe ways that we could better connect or collaborate. And then also, as I said, to invite participants to come to our NOAA in the Chesapeake Bay workshop, which is going to be in February, February 19th and 20th. We're still working out the exact location, but it'll probably be here in Annapolis or on the Eastern Shore. So that's TBD, but that information will be coming soon. But we'd love to have people join us for that workshop. So talk a little bit about the Chesapeake watershed. Uh, Large watershed, 64,000 square miles. It includes 6 states and the District of Columbia. So that means there's a lot of coordination that needs to occur across multiple jurisdictions, townships in Pennsylvania, cities and towns, and counties across Maryland and Virginia, Delaware, West Virginia, etc. So a lot to sort of coordinate to really affect what's going on within the water in the Chesapeake Bay, because as you can see from this map, it's a really large landmass and a relatively small water body that's also very shallow. So that creates some additional challenges as we're working on protection efforts. But all the way from Cooperstown, New York, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is, all the way down to Norfolk, Virginia, where DoD has major naval facilities. So there's a lot going on in this geography, in this space, and that just sort of adds to the work that we're doing. What does it look like here? I'm guessing a lot of you probably live within the watershed, but maybe not all. There's 18 million people in the watershed, and that number may have changed since I created this slide. There are about 150,000 people coming into the watershed each year. 10 million of those people live either near the shore or along the edges of the Chesapeake Bay. So they are directly interacting with the shorelines and the Chesapeake Bay environment. And then the rest of the people are interacting with the watershed that drains into the Chesapeake Bay. It's also home to a number of species of plants and animals that are really critical to the ecosystem. Some of our favorites are the iconic species like blue crab and striped bass are ones that people tend to gravitate to, but we also know that it's really important for waterfowl, a number of other plants and animal species, including underwater bay grass meadows that are also iconic to the region and really important habitat for a whole host of critters. And of course, I can't leave out the people. It's a very diverse area with multiple ethnicities, multiple cultures, languages, and beliefs and values. And so that again, or two, adds to the challenge of getting everyone on board to make sure we're protecting this national treasure for now and into the future, for future generations. The Chesapeake Bay has been for hundreds of years really changing as a result of human activities. Fisheries have been in decline due to overfishing and disease for a long time. And while management has done their best to keep up, some of the things that impact fishing are outside of harvest controls, for example. So, there's things that need to be done around habitat and water quality that also enhance fisheries. Land, I just mentioned the population has been growing over time, continues to grow. That just leads to increased development, which those of you who live around here have seen. And I say just in the past couple of years, at least in Annapolis, that's certainly taken off. And that development leads to more structures, more impervious surface, more runoff that carries with it chemicals, nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, and also sediment into the bay. And if you remember the map I showed you, it's a lot of land draining into the Chesapeake Bay. So that's a lot of nutrients, a lot of contaminants coming into the waterways and impacting the habitats and the living resources that live there. And of course, it's not new. Climate change is not new, but it's certainly playing out in real time. This area is highly susceptible to sea level rise, given increasing water temperatures and expansion of water, loss of ice and glaciers, as well as subsidence where the land is sinking. So this area is particularly sensitive to sea level rise, and we're seeing it at a relatively high rate compared to other parts of the nation. And so that leads to a lot of other um, changes. You can see it along our shorelines now. The marshes are changing. What used to be low marsh is now turning into open water, and that low marsh, where it can move, is moving landward. Uh, One of the iconic trees around here, at least on the eastern shore and parts where I grew up, the loblolly pine, you see what are called ghost forests. Um, the trees are inundated with salt water and no longer able to survive. So the marshes, the shorelines are changing. Where the shorelines change and people live, people want to do something about it. Sometimes what they do is choose to armor a shoreline, and that just takes away more habitat in more of those important areas that living resources require. So that's just one example, talking about sea level rise. Of course, we have rising water temperatures that are also happening. That's changing species composition as well as species distribution within the bay. So we're seeing new species come in. Just recently, within the past couple of years, Virginia has started a shrimp fishery. That's something that didn't exist just a couple of years ago. We have we're hearing that more red drum are coming into the bay and likely staying around longer than they have. A species like red drum also likes to eat things like blue crabs, and so when they were here in small numbers, the impact might have been minimal, but we don't really know what the impact is now, especially if they really are coming in large numbers and staying around longer, because they're preying on blue crabs, which is another fishery that we're trying to manage. So there's a lot of things happening with respect to climate change, including flooding. Downtown Annapolis here, where I live, floods regularly, and I know that's happening in Norfolk and other places. And of course, we've got higher rainfall events happening within the watershed and causing flooding there too. So a lot going on within the system that's impacting people as well as the living resources that we care about. So what's being done about all this? As I said, these issues aren't really new. They've been happening for hundreds of years, and certainly some have really accelerated or become exacerbated over the past couple decades. In the 1970s, there was a recognition by Congress that the Chesapeake Bay was in decline, and people didn't know exactly why. So they commissioned a study to understand what was going on. The results of that study came out in the early 80s, and it pointed to water quality or nutrients coming into the bay as a major culprit for degradation. And that led to really what became the Chesapeake Bay Program in 1983. And as part of that recognition and development of the Chesapeake Bay Program, what's called the Chesapeake Executive Council was formed, and that includes the governors of Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, the mayor of the District of Columbia, the EPA administrator, and the chair of what's called the Chesapeake Bay Commission. The Chesapeake Bay Commission is sort of a legislative coordination, facilitation arm of the Chesapeake Bay region. And so that leadership team signed an agreement. The first agreement was essentially just a statement that said, there's a lot we think we know what's going on now. We think nutrients are the culprit, and we need to do something to address it, but we can't do that alone. One jurisdiction within the Chesapeake Bay region cannot address that problem, and so we need to work together. And so they agreed to do that, and we're going to do it under this thing called the Chesapeake Bay Program. Not long after that, NOAA entered an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the EPA, pledging support for Chesapeake Bay Program efforts. So that's when NOAA first got involved. Following that, there was a subsequent Chesapeake Bay Agreement. And then in 1992 is when my office, the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office, was formed. We're mandated, we were authorized by Congress. We have legislation that created this office and to coordinate efforts across all of NOAA, or NOAA efforts that are working on Chesapeake Bay protection and restoration. So it was an effort to sort of accelerate, improve the support that NOAA is providing to the Chesapeake Bay. It also called on our office to do a number of things in the Bay, fund research, fund restoration, things like that, which we currently do today, and monitor the Bay conditions. And I'll get into that in more detail. We then had a 2000 Chesapeake Bay agreement, and then right when I came on board at the office was in 2009, and it was early on in President Obama's administration. He signed an executive order. The executive order was really targeted to federal agencies, and so the federal agencies weren't doing enough to support the Chesapeake Bay program, that they needed to do more. They needed to be more coordinated and work more closely together to really address the challenges facing the Bay. That was federally focused. And so when the Chesapeake Executive Order and what was referred to as the Chesapeake Bay Strategy related to the Executive Order came out, the states were saying, you know what, it's been since 2000 since we signed our last agreement, and things have changed. And we now have this executive order. The federal agencies are laying out a plan or a strategy. So what are we going to do from the state side? And so that led to what's called the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Agreement that included both federal partners and state partners in developing a plan for how we're going to address Chesapeake Bay challenges. And then, of course, in 2010, the Chesapeake TMDL went into place. That stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. That's basically EPA using regulatory frameworks to implement nutrient reductions across the state jurisdictions, targets that they all have to meet in terms of reducing nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. So we're currently operating under the 2014 agreement, and I'll get into that in a little more detail. So this is what the Chesapeake Bay Program partnership looks like. As I mentioned, we've got 6 states as well as the District of Columbia involved in this effort that get together regularly to discuss what we've agreed to do and how progress is going on those things. You also have the Bay Commission and EPA all the way up to the administrators level. There is an EPA office here in Annapolis that basically runs this entire program and is in charge of working with the states, the Bay Commission, and at the bottom here you see all the federal agencies that are involved. I don't know, some may be a surprise to you. Of course, EPA is not, but Department of Homeland Security, USDA, of course, Department of Commerce with NOAA, Department of Transportation, Department of the Interior, in particular Fish and Wildlife Service and the Park Service, and Department of Defense. Department of Defense has a lot of land within the Chesapeake Bay as operating bases throughout the system. So they come at it partly from a facilities standpoint because this is also their home. But they're also looking at doing things on those facilities that not only address water quality, but also enhance habitat for wildlife and living resources. So they're actually a pretty significant player here. And then the Army Corps of Engineers also has a lot of funding to implement habitat restoration projects, construct islands using dredge material, and other big projects. So DoD is a pretty major player as well. So this is what the Chesapeake Bay Program partnership looks like. There's a lot of people and policies and ideas to sort of coordinate and bring together to address the outcomes. One, to agree on what the outcomes should be, and then 2, to actually implement those things using resources, people time, and other things to get the job done. So a lot happening within the Chesapeake Bay Program. So this is like a high level view of what the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement looks like. This is the one that I said sort of brought together the executive order from 2009 and renewed or revised the 2000 agreement. So both the feds and the states were back together, as well as other partners of the Bay Program, on the same page with what it is we're trying to do. So there was a vision associated with this agreement. There were 10 goals established and 31 outcomes. It's a lot of outcomes. So what you're seeing here are the goals that came under that agreement. We got sustainable fisheries, healthy watersheds, stewardship, toxic contaminants, public access, climate resiliency, land conservation, environmental literacy, vital habitats, and water quality. Just saying that list sounds like a whole lot. And then under each one of these goals is anywhere between 1 to 5 outcomes. So outcomes are basically commitments of what are we going to do to support that overarching goal. The boxes that you see around the goals that I've listed here is where NOAA has direct involvement in supporting the outcomes under that goal. So we've been very involved in sustainable fisheries. That's one of the groups that my office actually leads and coordinates. We have a person on board who is the climate resiliency coordinator for the Chesapeake Bay Program. She runs a work group there to support adaptation, resiliency, and also science activities that understand changing climate. And then we have an environmental literacy program also housed here that I'll get into in more detail. And then we're supporting other aspects of the program under vital habitats like SAB and wetlands and water quality through our observation. So NOAA is very plugged into the Chesapeake Bay Program already, but there may be other things that parts of NOAA that are outside of the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office, could further contribute to this effort. So a little bit more about my office. We're relatively small. We're about 20 staff located both here in Annapolis, but also over at the Cooperative Oxford Lab in Maryland, which is part of the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science and jointly run with the state of Maryland, Maryland Department of Natural Resources. And then we have one person based down in Norfolk, Virginia. We make up a pretty diverse set of expertise, everything from scientists on board to policy analysts. We have a whole field and operations program that runs out of this office. We've got people that are experts in education, and we're just a good group. We're a fun place to be, fun place to work, and a great group that's really passionate about restoring the Chesapeake Bay. To dive in a little bit more into the more specific things that we do, we have a monitoring and observations program here at the office. Part of that observations program runs what's called the Chesapeake Bay Interpreted Buoy System. It's a set of buoys, several buoys that are located at various places throughout the Chesapeake Bay. They are tied into what we called the John Smith Trail at one point, although now it's less about the John Smith Trail and more about the data that we're bringing from those buoys. So they're collecting weather data, things like wind and atmospheric temperature. They're also collecting information on waves, currents, in situ temperature and salinity from the surface of the water. And all that gets provided through the Chesapeake Bay Interpreted Buoy System website. And it is used by a whole host of users. Recreational users is one key group. Commercial and recreational fisheries is another group that use those. And our very own National Weather Service uses this information in their marine weather forecast. So this data is getting picked up and used by multiple audiences, both within NOAA and our external constituents here in the Chesapeake Bay. We have just started a hypoxia monitoring program that is a different looking, well, it's actually pictured here in the center of your screen. A little bit of a different looking buoy. It has a string of sensors that come off the bottom and is collecting dissolved oxygen, conductivity, or salinity data from throughout the water column at various depths. That's something the CBIS buoys don't do since they're focused more on the surface. But these new buoys are collecting throughout the whole water column. And what you get is a plot like you see here, curve plot like you see here, where we can look at how those parameters are changing throughout the water column. And that's really important to assessing how well the Chesapeake Bay Program is doing with nutrient and sediment reduction. The idea there is if we keep the nutrients out of the water column, then we're going to get less of these detrimental impacts like low dissolved oxygen, hypoxic, and anoxic zones within the deeper water of the bay. So that's one component. This is used to sort of assess progress and success in implementing the total maximum daily load. Our interest is also in starting to use this data to better describe how habitat conditions in the water column are changing for fish, crabs, oysters, etc. So we're looking at using this data to develop habitat suitability models, other information that we can link to living resource data to understand how this really variable dynamic system is impacting those key resources. We also monitor structured habitats directly. So I'll get into the oyster goal a little later, but we've been working to restore oysters in multiple tributaries throughout the bay at a large scale. We have very specific success metrics that we're using to determine if that oyster restoration effort is performing the way we think it should or we would like it to. And so our office is providing bottom mapping surveys to assess the oyster reefs that have been constructed, and supporting other efforts to develop new monitoring techniques that might get us a little more information, not just on the structure of the reef, but sort of how the reef evolves over time and the community structure and other things, ecosystem services associated with the reef that we want to see. That's the reason we're restoring the reefs, not just to get the oysters back, but to get that really critical habitat back into the system. We're also working with the Army Corps of Engineers to monitor restoration sites such as Poplar Island. So what you see there on your screen, that island is Poplar Island. It's an island being restored using dredge spoil in a way that is also providing benefits to the ecosystem. The Army Corps is really interested in, is that construction actually providing the benefits that we would like in terms of, creating new wetlands and other habitat for turtles, fish, birds, those sorts of things. And so we're out there with gill nets, fyke nets, sometimes hook and line, depending on the project, to really understand what the fish utilization looks like, both within the island structure, within those what we call marsh cells, around the island exterior, and then also comparing that to reference sites that are outside the island restoration effort, but gives us a good way of comparing like what's happening on the island to what's happening in those more natural habitat areas. We're also using that information to help inform what future restoration looks like in the bay. So there's two other islands not far from here where construction is going to kick off soon in a very similar way to Poplar using dredged material, James and Barron Island. And so we are providing data we're collecting at Poplar as well as expert opinion to help guide what those restoration efforts look like going forward. In addition to all that, we run an acoustic telemetry array throughout the bay. We have 3 main gates that we operate with partners at Maryland Department of Natural Resources, the Virginia Marine Resource Commission, and the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory. These are acoustic fish tag receivers that sit on the bottom or on some sort of hard structure, and they're listening for fish that have been tagged with these acoustic tags. And using that data, we're able to figure out how fish are moving within the bay. And eventually we want to link those movements with what the environmental conditions were at the time. So it could be linked with the hypoxia data I mentioned earlier, with our Chesapeake Bay interpreted buoy system data, or other relevant environmental parameters to better understand how fish are using habitats within the bay and how their use of those habitats may be changing as conditions change with climate change and other factors. So that's relatively new. You see one of our lead for telemetry is actually pictured here holding that big red drum. I was lucky enough to be out there with her when she caught that. Um, that fish is now tagged and swimming around the bay somewhere, so I'm curious where it went after we caught it during the summer. But that's Wimele Cruz Mero, who leads our telemetry effort. Moving on to ecosystem science and synthesis, which is the group that I run here at the Chesapeake Bay office. We serve several functions. One is fisheries management support. So if you think back to the Chesapeake Bay Program slides I showed and the sustainable fisheries goal, there's a whole team that works to implement several outcomes under that goal. One is around blue crabs, so better or managing blue crabs, which is a cross-jurisdictional effort. Maryland and Virginia agreed back in 2008 and the Potomac River Fisheries Commission that managing blue crabs jurisdiction by jurisdiction wasn't really the best way to ensure a sustainable population. And so they agreed to work more closely. And we've been leading that team pretty much ever since. We're currently working with them on a new stock assessment for blue crabs, which we're hoping will inform the next phase of management. But I won't go into more on blue crabs. If you're interested in blue crabs, reach out to me because I could go on. We've also used the fisheries goal implementation team to address new and emerging issues. So the picture in the center is a blue catfish. Blue catfish are invasive to the bay. They were introduced in the 70s down in Virginia in the James River, but they since spread throughout the entire bay. And they're having some pretty significant impacts on other species of fish that are managed. Everything from striped bass, menhaden, herring, shad, and maybe even sturgeon. So it's a big issue, big concern for the fishery managers because it's impacting other fisheries that they manage. I should note that blue catfish can tolerate salinities up to 14 parts per thousand. Some of the larger ones, even 17 parts per thousand. So, at certain times of the year, that means almost a very, very large part of the Chesapeake Bay is available to them to move around and prey on other species. So that's a significant concern. The way that we've determined maybe the best to address it is through fishery management. And actually creating a fishery. So there's a lot of effort right now to develop a fishery for this, to reduce the populations and reduce them to a level that we think will have ecological benefits, or at least minimize the impacts they're having on some of the other species I mentioned. So those are some examples of fishery management. Just recently, we actually got funding to hold a striped bass workshop. Some of you who follow Chesapeake Bay things may have heard the last couple of years have not been great for striped bass. In particular, the juvenile index, which is a measure of recruitment in the bay, has been low, and we don't know exactly why. So we're using this fisheries goal team to sort of coordinate those efforts around striped bass. And then earlier on in the presentation, I mentioned we have someone on staff who runs the climate resiliency work group of the Bay Program. Right now, they're really focused on things like providing tools and information that can guide marsh adaptation and marsh migration strategies, both at very targeted places within the bay, but can be applied more broadly. They're also involved in sort of synthesizing and communicating what are some of the impacts to living resources that we're seeing as a result of rising water temperatures and other climate-related factors. So it's a very active group. They're helping guide restoration efforts, resiliency efforts, and providing science that tracks climate change within the bay over time. And then lastly, for ecosystem science and synthesis, this gets to the synthesis part. We are pulling data from the buoys that I mentioned earlier, working with researchers at various institutions in the bay to develop a lot of different science products, things like marine heat wave analysis, habitat suitability models that actually link habitat condition to production of fish, such as juvenile spot. And we're also working with partners at the satellite service to better use satellite data All this to sort of look at the entire system, understand how environmental conditions are changing, where we see anomalies or things that are outside of average boundaries for long-term data. We're noting that, and then we're linking those anomalies to what we think either observed or predicted the impacts would be on fish, crabs, oysters, etc. And then each year we develop these what are called seasonal summaries um, for each season of the year. And at the end of the year, we roll everything up into what's called the State of the Ecosystem Report that the Northeast Fisheries Science Center develops. And that information is being used to guide fisheries management at a federal level through the Mid-Atlantic Council and try to bring more ecosystem considerations into the conversation as they're making their decisions. We also work directly on restoring habitat within the bay. We're part of the Office of Habitat Conservation. We're very interested in improving or enhancing habitat health for multiple reasons, both people as well as living resources. One of our primary efforts has been large-scale oyster restoration. So as part of the 2014 agreement that I showed earlier, there was an outcome to restore 10 tributaries by 2025. That was a huge, ambitious goal, I'll say. We didn't know exactly what it would mean when we first put that out there, but we've learned a lot along the way. And the good news is we're being successful in restoring tributaries. So we're going to hit our goal at 10 tributaries here very shortly. If I just take one of those tributaries, Harris Creek, which is located in the Choptank River area, that was well over 300 acres of restoration, about the size of the National Mall. And that represents, as far as I've heard, haven't heard anything different recently, the largest oyster restoration effort anywhere on the planet. And we're doing it essentially 10 times over. Every tributary has different acreage goals, but we're essentially doing that 10 times over. And it's a coordinated effort through both 5 of the tributaries are in Maryland, 5 are in Virginia. So we're working across multiple jurisdictions, multiple partners, NGOs, et cetera, to get this done, and with the Corps of Engineers. So major effort, and the picture you see here is from one of those restored reefs. You can see a nice thriving reef with not just oysters, but all the other things that come with it. And that's what we're seeing throughout the restoration areas. So good news, not only has the restoration been implemented, but the reefs are thriving and doing what we hope they would do. We're also very much engaged in community partnerships. We have worked closely with our home office, the Office of Habitat Conservation, to establish 2 what are called habitat focus areas within the Chesapeake Bay. One is in the Choptank River complex in Maryland, and the newest one is in the Middle Peninsula of Virginia, which includes the York River, the Majac Bay, and the Piankatank River. Majac Bay, remember, that's where I grew up, my home. Anyway, we've got a lot going on in those areas. The whole idea is to sort of have NOAA focus in one place, bring multiple line offices together, bring multiple community partners together in those places, identify common goals and objectives, and then work to implement those. And what we're finding is that by bringing people together around those common goals, it's allowed us to access or be successful in accessing more funding to support the implementation of projects. So, and the Choptank habitat focus area, we essentially have sort of stepped a little bit more to the background. We as NOAA have stepped a little bit more to the background, and there's a group called Envision the Choptank that continues to move forward with all these efforts. So we help create the framework and the right partnerships, and then we're able to step back a little bit and let those things continue on their own. And so far, that's happening. And Middle Peninsula, Virginia is still ongoing, but a lot of good work going on down there. And then we have our environmental literacy group here within the Chesapeake Bay office. They implement programs like BWET, the Bay Watershed Education and Training Program, that's providing support and resources to teachers in the environmental literacy community. It's also supporting students through the Meaningful Watershed Education I slipped up on that. But through the MIWI program, providing access to students to get out and learn more about the environment, that instills in them better understanding of what's happening, and then also piques their interest for supporting NOAA's mission in the future. And we've also run training programs through what's called the Environmental Science and Training Center, located in Oxford on the Eastern Shore, to help support environmental educators and supporting students. And then we also have an internship program that we run through this office. Some of the interns that we had last year are actually up here in the right corner of your screen. So that's something that we've been doing for several years now. We continue to do. A number of those interns have gone on to get jobs in the environmental community, either some within NOAA, some elsewhere, but it really is helping develop the workforce around these really important issues that we're working on. And I was able to speak in more detail about what the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office is doing, but I didn't want to stand up here and try to represent everything that NOAA is doing in the Chesapeake, but I did want to highlight that NOAA has a huge footprint here. Of course, NOAA headquarters is in Silver Spring within the watershed. There are 2 national estuary research reserves in Maryland and Virginia. We have 2 national marine sanctuaries, one at Mallows Bay on the Potomac, one the Monitor Merrimack down in Virginia. The weather forecast offices are folks that we talk to and partner with on different things. There's the Bay Hydro that operates within the Chesapeake Bay, providing mapping and charting functions through the National Ocean Service. You have co-ops providing tides and currents and marine navigation support services for commerce coming in and out of the bay. We've got the NESDIS, which has been, I think, taking a more concerted effort in really trying to provide customized products that help with communities with things that are important to them. So really trying to scale their products and services to address those needs of the Chesapeake Bay and communities within the bay. There's a Cooperative Oxford Lab, which is the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science that we partner with closely, conducting a lot of good science in the bay and continue to expand their efforts. The Sea Grant offices in Maryland and Virginia, and then of course us. So just a lot going on here. I think I just want to recognize, we recognize that all of these groups are operating here, and we have some connections to them. We probably could have more, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to hold the workshop coming up. So quickly, where are we in terms of addressing the watershed agreement? It's a bit of a mixed bag. I said 31 outcomes. 18 of those are most likely going to be completed by 2025, which is kind of the unofficial end date of the 2014 agreement. 11 of those probably will not get done and require either they run into challenges or they require revisions, and then 2 are uncertain. The good news is the ones that NOAA has been supporting, for the most part, are all on track and going to meet their goal here in the next year or so. So we're doing what we said we would do, and we're being successful at it. But because some of the outcomes are not on track, there's been a lot of conversation here within the Bay program for probably the past year and a half, at least a year, thinking about, well, what's next? 2014, we said the end date was kind of 2025. So where are we going to go? Are some of the challenges related to the way that we work as a Chesapeake Bay program, the program structure, the framework, the way people actually work together and conduct business? Is it that some of the outcomes that we formed aren't really the right outcomes and we need to revise and rethink those? And essentially, what we decided through this steering committee that was developed, that I sat on, Kevin Shaba, our director, sat on, Shannon Sprague, our deputy director, and a few others in our office, is that yes, we need to review the program structure, and we need to also look at the outcomes from the 2014 agreement and make some revisions or changes. Simply sticking with what we have is not going to lead us to success. So we need to sort of think about all those things. Um, and some new things have emerged through that process. One example is, should we be focusing more on shallow water? A lot of the TMDL focuses on deep trench and deeper areas of the bay, but is that really the most important when it comes to living resources? Should we be shifting our efforts more to shallow water, where both people and living resources are interacting, and where living resources are really utilizing those habitats? So that's one example of a potential shift that we're going to take into the future. And another is people. Not that people were excluded from the previous agreement, but the thought is that we need to do a better job of really engaging with communities throughout the watershed, understanding what it is that they're interested in and want to try to do and need, and then better aligning the things that we're doing through the Bay program to address those. Um, so the recommendation, I sort of touched on these, is really, yes, we need to reevaluate program structure. We need to reevaluate the outcomes. And the way I think we're looking at this from the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office standpoint is this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to continue the successes that we've had with oyster restoration. And in other areas, it's also an opportunity to refine areas that we think haven't been working as well. And so I know, as I said, we've been very invested in this process to date, but we are very interested in what other parts of NOAA might bring to the table or might be able to support in both the development of new or revised outcomes, as well as just other science community-based support that we could bring to the table that aligns with Chesapeake Bay Program priorities. So that is why, in the end, we decided through the the North Atlantic Regional Team, collaboration team, that we thought the timing was right to get all of NOAA together, all of NOAA who's sort of focused and working in the Chesapeake together, to one, just better raise awareness of what all of us are doing and look for collaboration opportunities for the work that we're doing. Also, identify specific things that NOAA programs are doing that can support Chesapeake Bay protection and restoration more directly if they're not already, and then trying to connect those NOAA products and services better to what will be a revised set of Chesapeake Bay program goals and priorities. And so that's a workshop that we're planning for February 19th and 20th. And we would love to have those of you who are doing work that you've heard of something today and you're like, you know what, I think I could really help with that. Please reach out to me. Love to have you be a part of our workshop. And that is it for the presentation. But thank you for all your time. I know 15 minutes is a long time to sit and listen. Hopefully you learned something today, and hopefully we piqued your interest in the workshop. Happy to take any questions for the next 10 minutes or so. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That was really interesting. I happen to live in Maryland, so I'm like, woohoo, the entire presentation. Audience, this is your host, Lisa from NOAA Library again, and we have about 10 minutes for your questions, and we'd love to hear them. So please type them in the Q&A chat. It's different from the audience chat, so I can share them on screen. And remember that your first name will show up with your questions. So if you prefer asking questions anonymously, toggle the anonymous button at the very bottom of your Q&A chat. We did get one question, Bruce, while you're speaking, so let me show that on screen. This first person asks, can you talk more about the projects that the NCBO grants funding to?
Well, we have a couple of different grant programs, so I'm not sure which one that's referring to. We run fisheries grants, science grants. Those are the ones that I'm most involved with. We really tried to better target those. At one point, we would just put out kind of an FFO that was pretty broad, and we got all sorts of stuff in, from soft shell clams to, I don't know, other things that may be less aligned with our priorities. So the past couple of years, we've really, well, several years now, we've really tried to focus those more, and we've funded work on things like oyster reef ecosystem services, which links directly to our oyster restoration goals. We funded some work on blue catfish that I mentioned. That was a real need and interest of the fishery managers here in the region. And we've also put more of an emphasis on fish habitat, trying to develop better link environmental data with fishery data, which is something that wasn't really happening. um, the point of doing that is to try to get a better understanding of how fish are responding to changing habitat conditions, both structured and water column. So that's our fisheries science grants, and then we also have the Bay Watershed Education and Training grants that go out to um, multiple jurisdictions here within the Chesapeake Bay for educational support and educational program support.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bruce. This next question is from Denwood, who asks, as a boat captain in the Bay, how best can I engage with NOAA activities?
Yeah, one, send me an email. I'll put my contact information in the chat. Um, the group that I mentioned, the Sustainable Fisheries Goal Implementation Team, might be an area you want to get a little more involved in. We do have some representation from various recreational fishing organizations within the Bay. Um, but we would love to. One of the things we're really interested in is sort of reinvigorating that group and getting more really interested and engaged partners on that team. But that's where we're really talking about fishery issues. If you're interested in other things, I'd be happy to point you in other locations. But if it's fishing interest, contact me and I can connect you with our goal team.
This next question is asked by Anonymous and asks, is there any similarities between how blue crabs are managed and how menhaden are managed?
uh, they both have reference points. No, that that's that question we could go into a lot. So they're very different. Um, the blue crab. Well, if I'm talking about Chesapeake Bay, blue crab is managed by three jurisdictions. You have Maryland, you have Virginia, and you have the Potomac River Fisheries Commission. There's a very, very robust survey that happens every year, so we have a really good handle on the population within the Bay and how it's changing year to year. We have the Chesapeake Bay Stock Assessment Committee, which sort of assesses whether or not our reference points are the right ones to support management. So it's a very science-driven process and informed by a lot of data. I'm not suggesting menhaden isn't, but menhaden is managed coast-wide, and so you have a lot more players involved, multiple states involved, and I think there's still some questions around how there's still questions overall about the menhaden population and whether some areas are seeing less than they used to, and what's driving that. Is that environmental change? Is it fishing pressure? I think there's still a lot of questions out there. So I don't know if that answers your question. They're just two very different fisheries, and I think they're handled differently for those reasons, the geography as well as some of the data and information gaps.
Thank you. This next question, show that on scene. Actually, this person has a number of related questions, but the first and broadest question is, the citizen science program has not been well coordinated from my perspective. Are you engaged with the program?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some, not too much. So I can't speak in a real informed way about what's worked and what hasn't there. I mean, it's of interest to us. I think different ideas have emerged about how to best utilize citizen science beyond what I'm familiar with is some of the water quality citizen science work that's happening. But I think there's other opportunities to get people more involved in citizen science around living resources. Um, you know, better teaming up with recreational fishing community and other people that are utilizing the Chesapeake Bay is one way to get information. I know there's some efforts to try to get more information through apps that recreational folks use on where they're catching certain things. So kind of going off track a little bit, but I'm happy to connect you with the folks that are leading that effort. I just haven't been real involved in the citizen science program in a little while.
Yeah, and to that point, I just wanted to bring everybody's attention. Bruce just typed his email address into the chat, so if you're interested in contacting Bruce directly, you can do so by email. Related to this last question, the same person asks if you have if the group is engaged with river keepers.
Yes, we do. In various ways. We're very much tied into the river keepers out on in the chop tank area, where we're conducting oyster restoration, as well as we have the habitat focus area in the chop tank that I mentioned. So we have also worked with them on issues like invasive catfish down the James River. One of the river keepers down there has been very involved in that effort. So the short answer is yes. If you have, if you recognize areas where maybe we're not as connected as we should be, again, please let me know, and we're happy to talk with you about that and the ideas you have.
Let's see. So this next question comes from Rebecca, who asks, new studies are showing that seagrass and oysters can have mutually beneficial impacts for each other. Are these results changing how oyster restoration is occurring around seagrass beds that are protected?
Yeah, great question. So um, a couple things. There are a couple of pilot studies that are looking at implementing oyster restoration around seagrass beds to try to improve the health of the bed. I guess for everyone's benefit, some of the mutual benefits are oysters improve water clarity by feeding, so they're taking more particulate matter out of the water column, which provides more light for seagrass. And one of the major issues in the bay is that seagrass are light limited, which makes it harder for them to grow. And then all the other stressors that are impacting them can then become exacerbated. So oysters help clean the water to provide more light for SAB. But SAB can also potentially buffer ocean acidification, which is detrimental to oyster growth. And so, yes, one of the concepts has been to do a better job of co-locating those. It hasn't been done on a large scale that I know of, only on a small scale. But it is something we think about when we're doing large scale oyster restoration. Are these oysters potentially benefiting SAB in the area, and can that be a strategy? Can large scale oyster restoration actually be a strategy for enhancing seagrass beds as well?
Thank you. And before I ask this last question, I just wanted to point out that there seems to be a lot of interest in the workshop. I believe it's in February. Someone wanted you to display the information again. But since we don't have a lot of time, is there a link that people can follow to get to that workshop?
I don't have a link up yet, but I guess I would say if you're interested, email me and I will add you to our participant list so that you can be on our email distribution for the workshop.
Perfect. And that's again bruce.vogt@noaa.gov. And last question here. Uh, do you engage with the abandoned/derelict vessels program for the Bay Area?
No,
Okay, I guess
no,
that's
we
the
have some connections to the reef program at Maryland DNR, but nothing, nothing real specific at this point. But it sounds like you're speaking of something maybe bigger scale than that. So, no, not that I'm aware of.
All right. Well, that was our last question. Thank you so much, Bruce. This has really been great. I've learned a lot myself, and I'm looking forward to taking advantage of some of the things that you've mentioned today.